The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you on behalf of IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Witting. Today's guest, Evan Meecham, was a successful businessman living in Colorado. A retired major in the United States Air Force Reserve, Evan worked for 16 years with manufacturing companies in the automotive aftermarket. He was an owner and president of Velm, Inc., and when Evan sold Velm in 1993, he started BPE Incorporated, the parent company for several businesses, including EMA Incorporated. When Evan was in his mid-30s, he was involved in a horrendous automobile accident while driving in the mountains. When he swerved to avoid a deer, he lost control on a wintry highway, and his car was literally cut in half by a semi-truck. It took many years of healing and rehabilitation to recover from his injuries, but the knowledge of that visit home during his NDE would stay with him for the rest of his life and would change the way he lived in every possible manner. As Evan's life continued, he awakened to a closeness to spirit he had never known before. He could see entities from the higher energy realms, hear their words of grace, and help those spirits who were stuck to move into the light. Evan's experience motivated him to go back to school again. He studied psychology, became a regression therapist, minister, and spiritual counselor. He is trained in NLP, spirit release, Gestalt therapy, Reiki energy healing, and as a transportational psychologist. He attends and supports the Buddhist Shambhala Mountain Center and volunteers at the Fish Food Bank, where he serves as a caseworker, counseling and mentoring community members, helping them find their feet and learn to thrive. As well, Evan is a published author and writes spiritually uplifting articles. His most recent submission is in the latest publication of the Creation Spirituality Communities. Evan, welcome to NDE Radio.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's good to have you here. You sent me a photograph of the car after the wreck. I don't know how the heck you survived that. My gosh, it was just a shambles, pieces of a car, not a car anymore. Tell us how it happened and what you experienced.
You know, it's very it's a cold night, probably around 10 o'clock. The road was, of course, being in wintertime and in the mountains. I was driving through the Rocky Mountains at the time. The road was not in the best condition, and I, being 30 years old, was driving probably too fast, and I came around a corner on a downgrade, and there was an enormous mule deer standing in the lane right in front of me, and I had literally no time. The deer was either going to come through the windshield or I would have to swerve and try to miss the deer, which I did. And the swerving part went very well, but the recovery didn't happen. And the car just continued in a straight line right across the center of the highway and into oncoming traffic, and a semi-truck, which was coming up the hill, literally hit right behind my front left tire and went straight through the vehicle at a 45-degree angle. And literally, as you said from the picture, there's really nothing left of half of the vehicle.
Wow. You were unconscious at the start of
I mean, this? You know, it's fascinating. You learn so much about life and death, and I think I certainly wondered what it was like to be in a life-threatening situation. And truthfully, once I made the move with the automobile and tried to swerve out of the way, everything happened in a split second, and I don't remember even contacting the other vehicle, and I simply woke up some minutes, I suppose, later, And I found myself on the floor of the vehicle, looking up at the steering wheel, and my body was quite numb. Obviously, I was shaken severely. It probably had a traumatic brain injury as well, which was never diagnosed, but I certainly lost a lot of memory post the accident, and I was struggling to figure out where I was at the moment. So it was a very confusing time.
I guess you thought at first that you were paralyzed from this, but then found you could use your arms?
It was again a fascinating experience in the sense that I'll certainly say for myself, and I'm sure for other people, they're always facing severe injuries and long-term problems with your physical body going forward. Everyone's very frightened of those types of things. I certainly was. Prior to the accident, I found myself on the floor of the vehicle, and when my senses began to return, I noticed that I had limited feeling below the mid-thoracic area of my spinal cord, and I was reassessing other things when I felt this numbing sensation that started in the middle of my back and went downward, and I lost all feeling with everything below the mid-thoracic area of my back. And it was fascinatingly, I was calculating what I had left rather than what I had lost. And that was, I thought, an amazing observation that a human being will do that rather than mourn the loss of something.
I think it says a lot about your character that you took the positive rather than the negative on that.
Thank you.
When did the beginning of your NDE take place? Were you still in the car when that happened?
Yes, I was. Where I was on this highway was a great distance from any city of size. There was a small city at the bottom of the mountain that was 35 minutes away, and to go back from the city that I came from was another 50 minutes. So I was in that vehicle for at least maybe close to an hour, and I would float in and out of consciousness, and as time went on, I obviously was struggling to maintain staying with my body, and as I was beginning to fade, I had experienced the winter cold. Now all the glass is gone in the vehicle. The vehicle is ripped wide apart. It's in the mountains. It's bitter cold, and I'm shaking and freezing, and the pain is beginning to be oppressive. And as I began to lose consciousness, all of those feelings went away, and I felt a warmth that took me over and relaxed me. And as I was slipping away, I had the thought that even if there was nothing beyond this lifetime, and I had been raised in a very rigid religion as a youth, so I had been instructed on heaven and hell, and I found myself saying that even if there was nothing more, this was acceptable. I felt warm. I felt comforted. I felt like I was going to close my eyes and go to sleep in the most comfortable manner.
Sounds like you were freezing to death along with the injuries.
May have been. I found myself awakening in a very strange place. I was laying on what appeared to be dirt, ground, earth. There were small rocks about me and on the ground. And as I started to gain my senses, I looked up. I saw to my right there was an incredible light source, and it was white, beautiful light, but it was off in the distance, and the light was bright. Even the small rocks that I mentioned before were throwing a shadow. The light was on the right side, and the shadow extended back away from the rocks to the left. I rolled to my left side, and I looked, and it was dark in that direction. I could see nothing. I laid there for some time, began to pick myself up. I didn't have to do much. I more or less floated to an upright position. And as I looked towards the light, there was a group of light beings. They were the size of human beings. I did not recognize faces, or I did not recognize the details of a body, but there was a group of 5, and I literally floated to them. And I knew these entities. They were familiar to me. They were not familiar from the current life that I had been living. They were not familiar from a past life, but I knew these entities, and I felt incredibly comforted that they were there.
Did they feel more like human beings or angelic beings?
They certainly were enlightened beings. They radiated love. There was no, I didn't speak with my normal faculties. They did not speak to me, yet we were communicating. And they literally surrounded me and embraced me and held me, and I felt an overwhelming acceptance, an overwhelming embrace of love. I had just been in an accident that was my fault. I had been careless. There was no judgment. There was only acceptance. And it was the most amazing feeling I've ever had. And I was literally unable to comprehend everything that was happening to me. There was a great deal of communication. This did not feel or appear like anything I had been taught in my religious studies. There was no gatekeeper. There was no judgment. There was no nothing negative in any way. And the feeling was fascinating because I felt like everything was exactly as it should be. I had no regrets. And the welcoming that I received was as if I had done something wonderful, and that I had been a successful human being and had been acceptable and had lived my life in a good manner. So it was lovely.
Do you recall, Evan, if they communicated besides the love that you felt from them? Was there anything else that
absolutely.
Was there anything else they were communicating to you?
There was, and I would love to tell you, I remember everything that they said to me, everything that came into my mind, but I don't. After a period of time, and of course there was, I have no idea how long I was there, there was no feeling of time. There was no feeling of the passing of time. But there was one of these entities that spoke to me. And inside my mind, I was told that it's my choice whether I come home, which was perfectly acceptable. I could stay, I could go home. And that's the way it was placed before me, that this was my home, not Earth. And that I had the opportunity to stay. Or if I so chose, that I could go back. Interestingly, I immediately thought of my children. And the thought came into my mind that I would love to see them grow up and see them move forward in their life and experience through them the joys that they would have on earth. There was no further discussion, and I was, in the blink of an eye, in an instant, I was literally hurled back into my physical body, and the overwhelming bitterness of the cold weather. And by that time, my senses were awakened and the pain was excruciating. And I was being extracted from the vehicle with the jaws of life, and men were desperately pulling the car apart on the opposite side and trying to extract me. They finally ripped off the door and were able to pull me out, put me on their special stretcher and put the neck brace on and move me into the ambulance for the 35-minute ride down the mountain. I remember very little of that, very little.
And this was a hospital in a small city in Utah, and it sounded like they were just getting into trauma work from what you described to me.
It was
the doctors and nurses there.
It was an amazing experience. This was a small town, and it was in Utah, and there were 8 or 10 doctors and a group of nurses and other medical personnel that had gathered there for their first run-through of the trauma center that they had established. Evidently, this road claims a lot of accident victims, and they felt that they should establish a trauma center. So all of the specific personnel that would be called in for a trauma were already at the hospital.
Isn't that amazing?
It was an absolutely amazing coincidence. Synchronicity, maybe, is a better. Yes. And I was brought in, placed on the table, and all of these doctors, they were everywhere. They were they were poking and prodding, and my injuries were severe. My lung on the left side had been totally collapsed, and my thoracic cage was crushed. My shoulder and scapula were broken. I had severely ruptured my spleen. It could not be saved. And I was bleeding severely internally. The doctors did not wait for pain medications. The enormous needle goes into your stomach, and they withdraw the blood. You have been leaking for the last hour and a half from the spleen, and the lead doctor is trying to get a chest tube into my left part of the thoracic cage so that he can reinflate lung, and there is so much damage. My ribs had over 300 breaks in my ribs, and so it was a very difficult job, and they did a wonderful.
They did something else for you too, which surprised you and surprised me when I read your note about it.
Yes,
you asked for someone to say a prayer for you.
I did.
Describe what happened.
This is, if I make it through this without having to stop, it will be a miracle. But it was an amazing experience. The doctors worked as fast as they could, and the emergency room was people racing in all directions, and there was a cacophony of noises and people calling out to each other. And I whispered to the doctor if there was somebody that could pray for me. It was so amazing. He didn't hesitate. There was no hesitation. And he called for his staff to come close, and they gathered around my bed, and they placed their hands on me, and they prayed for me. And it was complete silence, and everyone in their room was quiet and hopeful and part of that prayer. And when it was over, they became doctors and nurses again.
Boy, I wish every trauma team in the world would do that for their patients. I was so touched by that. And it's so important. It's so important to they gave you said a 3% chance of survival.
Yes.
I'll bet that prayer alone added many, many more percent to the situation.
They cannot know how important that was to me. It was a beautiful, tiny moment when time stopped. And I felt supported not only by their wonderful knowledge and skills, but by how much they cared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have residual problems since that accident?
Yes. Sad to say, I do. I do my best to move forward, and I literally have wasted very little time worrying about all the problems that I continue to have. I live an incredible life, and I have a happy soul, and I just live with the things that I have to deal with. My left lung was never really fully inflated again. I have a pulmonary problem. I use oxygen at nighttime. I can't lay on my back. Laying on the left side, the ribs, there's one rib that protrudes into my lung about 1.5 centimeters, and it's constantly
that must be so painful.
Yeah, and one of the severest injuries that I received was when I was hit so hard by that truck. My right knee was driven into the dashboard of the vehicle, and it drove the femur through the hip and broke off the femoral head. The doctors at first didn't know if I would ever walk without assistance. I was able to recover quite well. And as they told me at that time, sometime in the future, I would have to have that hip replaced because it would become so unmanageable.
Yes.
And that I did about 8 years ago. I finally had that hip replaced.
Evan, I'd love for you to tell our audience how, even with these physical handicaps you were left with, you have made a complete change in your whole life's direction. Tell us about that.
Thank you for bringing this up, because I think sometimes we focus on on the accident or what happened to us, and we focus only on our incursion back to our home in the spirit world. But the truth is that the most important thing, when we come back to the earth, is what did that experience mean to us, and how do we make that meaningful in our life as we go forward. It took me many years to even understand what happened to me. When this first happened, people didn't talk about NDEs, and certainly in my world, talking about dying and crossing over and coming back was not anything that you wanted to talk about openly. It was very difficult to find people to talk to. My world began to change immediately. I saw things differently. I stepped away from all of the motivations that the world calls us to, and the simple things, what I ate. I became a vegetarian. I began to meditate. I found people I could meditate with. When I moved to Colorado, I found Shambhala and spent hundreds of hours in the Buddhist retreat in the mountains, meditating and learning how to meditate and learning about Buddhism. Later, I support a Swami that is in Loveland, and what an incredible individual he is. I research all types of spirituality, being a transpersonal psychologist, which accepts the soul as a part of who we are, certainly helps me relate to how other people feel, trying to balance life with spirituality and find out who they truly are and what their life's purpose is. I can't imagine what I put my family through. I became a totally different individual, and my family was forced to adjust. I'm very lucky. My family did adjust to all my changes. I wrote a paper one time about all of the changes that took place in my life over a 20-year period, and the list was lengthy. And I have to say sorry to my wife and sorry to my children and my friends, because so many things change and your friends change. And as your ideas and as your philosophy and as your behavior changes, you find new ones who are on a path that leads to illumination, and you build friendships that are invaluable and incredibly helpful in life. So,
wow,
how you change your life after the experience. It's how you change your heart after the experience. That is the real judge of what this experience, this incredible experience, truly means to you, and how you apply yourself to the world. As you change yourself, you help change everything.
So, to that extent, even a terrible accident like this can be an amazing gift.
Oh, it is a gift. Absolutely.
Evan, unfortunately, we are out of time for today. Do you have a website that if people wanted to get in touch with you or find out more about the work that you're doing?
I don't have a website currently, but I'm in the process of establishing one. My email is simply my name. It's Meecham at evanmeecham.com. So it's very simple. Anyone is welcome to send me an email. I love to respond, and I'd enjoy any interaction that might come of this.
Well, I think people have learned a lot just from this half hour you've spent with us, and I really thank you for that, Evan. If listeners would like to hear this show again or any of our nearly 400 past shows, just go to NDE Radio and hit the Past Shows button. For more information about IANDS, go to their website at iands.org. And listen again next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern, for more NDE Radio. This is Lee Witting saying thanks for listening.